right, thanks for joining me in another episode of Why Not Go, the channel dedicated to rock and roll, especially punk, and especially the Sex Pistols. I want to thank everyone for liking the videos and commenting. I got a nice comment recently where a viewer said she loved my Sex Pistols tutorials. And I just thought it was a funny word, tutorial. It sounds like a class. And so this is another Sex Pistols video, and it's about Wally Nightingale. And some people might not know, but Wally Nightingale wrote the music for the song Did You Know Wrong, which was the B-side for this beautiful single. I still remember when it came out, May 27th, 1977, God Save the Queen. And you can see there the B-side is the song Did You Know Wrong. And if you open up the record, you'll see, the camera probably can't pick it up, but it lists Jones, Rotten, Matlock, and Cook as the writers. Camera probably can't pick that up, but that's what it says. It lists the four members of the Sex Pistols as the writers of those two songs. I think this is one of the greatest singles of all time. I still love these two songs. But maybe what a lot of people don't know is that Wally Nightingale should have been listed as a writer on Did You Know Wrong, because he wrote the music. When the Sex Pistols met with Johnny Rotten on August 22nd at the Roebuck Pub on Kings Road, I also cover that in another video. That was the Sex Pistols, the band that became the Sex Pistols, had actually been going for almost 3 years, since late 1972, when they started up with Wally Nightingale. The band, when they started, Wally Nightingale and Steve and Paul, they all went to the Christopher Wren School. So they had known each other for a while. Wally Nightingale lived in East Acton, and Steve and Paul, I think, lived nearby in Hammersmith. And in 1972, I'll put the flyer for the concert up, October 29th, they went to see the Wembley Festival of Music at the Wembley Empire Pool. And on the bill were the Faces, the New York Dolls, and the Pink Fairies. I kind of remember the Pink Fairies. Obviously, the Faces and the New York Dolls were famous. And Steve says that this inspired them to start a band when these three friends from school went to this concert. He writes, I think the New York Dolls turned me on to it. I've never seen anything like it. Musically, they were bad, but really exciting, really mad. So that's neat. So these three friends who used to meet very often at Wally's house. Wally's parents, I believe, worked, they both worked, so they didn't mind them going over there and hanging out. Wally, I believe, was already playing guitar, and around this time, after they went to this concert and they were inspired, Wally said to Steve, hey, you've got so much stolen equipment, why don't we start a band? And that's exactly what they did in late 1972. I'll put up some pictures here of 50 Hemlock Road in East Acton. And I have, I think, a front picture and then pictures of the Steve and Paul and Wally hanging out in the side in the backyard. And yeah, it was just a loose group of friends. When they started, they had Glenn wasn't in the band. As most people know, Steve Jones was the singer. The original lineup was Paul Cook on drums. I think he had just started learning to play drums in late 1972. Another schoolmate from the Christopher Wren School, Stephen Hayes, was on bass. And they had a farfisa organ player named Jimmy Mackin. So it was they were teenagers, young teenagers. It was a loose group of friends. and they would hang out a lot at Wally's house. I believe they practiced in his bedroom. I guess the parents didn't mind if they were both working, if they made a lot of noise during the day. And this is how the band started. They were big fans of the New York Dolls and also the Faces, and they played a lot of Faces covers. And here's some more pictures of them at Hemlock Road. Wally is the one with the sort of I don't know, Rod Stewart haircut and the glasses. And so I don't know if they rehearsed that often, but they rehearsed at Wally's house all during 1973. They were learning their instruments, and then with Steve Jones as the singer. And at one point, Stephen Hayes, the young man that they knew from the Christopher Wren School, he left on bass, and so did Jimmy Mackin. At one point, he was the Farfisa organ player, and a guy named Dale Nunes came in, and he was Paul Cook's brother-in-law. So he was in the band for a while, but apparently he wasn't that committed, and maybe the others weren't either. I think all during this time it was really Wally and Steve and Paul who were the nucleus of the band, and the ones probably most serious about trying to learn their instruments and try to progress as a band. But they towards the end of 1973, they weren't very happy with Paul Cook's brother-in-law on bass. And Steve Jones, he had been going to Malcolm's shop for a long time, I think since 1972. But it was around this time, it was probably late 1973, that he was telling Malcolm about his band. And he mentioned to Malcolm that they weren't happy with their bass player. And Malcolm said, "Oh, I've got a guy that works here on Saturdays who plays bass." And that was, of course, Glen Matlock. And I'll show an advertisement here for the Marquee. I thought they met up with Glen Matlock later in 1974, but according to Sex Pistols Photo Archive, they seem to do great research, they said that this is the Thin Lizzy date at the Marquee where they all met. I think Malcolm had told Steve and Paul about Glen, and he told Glen about them, and they all agreed to meet at this concert. It was February 5th, 1974, and apparently the very next day, Glen went over to 50 Hemlock Road, Wally's house, and he auditioned. And he says here that they came up to me at the Marquee and said, "Fancy a tryout with us?" And then Glen said, "Okay." And then they told him to come on down to Wally's house the next day, February 6th. And Glen was also a big fan of the Faces, so they really hit it off with that connection. And the first record they played together, the first song that they played together was the Faces song, "Three Button Hand Me Down." And they were very impressed with Glen Matlock because he could actually play the song. And so he was then and there their new bass player. So in 1974, Malcolm was very loosely managing the band. I don't know if he was super interested, but he was such a father figure to Steve Jones that he was always helping him out. And one of the first places that they rehearsed once they got Glen Matlock in the band was at the Covent Garden Community Center on Earlham Street. I'm not sure how long they rehearsed there. And then they were called The Strand, of course. They named the band after the Roxy Music song back in 1973. Steve, Paul, and Wally had named the band The Strand. So after they rehearsed for a while at the Covent Garden Community Center, Malcolm got them another space called the Furniture Cave, and I put that in my video about the early Sex Pistol sites, and that's at 533 Kings Road. I'll show an old picture of the building here. It actually looks the same these days. And they rehearsed there for a while, And I'll show a picture here. This picture was actually taken at that rehearsal space. Malcolm also got them a space just around the corner from the furniture cave, and this was on Lots Road. And he got this because he had a connection. I think it was he had a connection with, I think it was Chris Spedding, who rehearsed his band there. And Malcolm got them a space here on Lots Road. I'll show a picture of the building. So they bounced around a bit, first Covent Garden, and then at the Furniture Cave on Kings Road, and then Lots Road. And then later on in 1974, Wally Nightingale's father got them the rehearsal space at Riverside Studios in, I believe it's on Crisp Road in Hammersmith. And I'll show an old picture of that building there. I think that building is still there. Wally's father, by the way, was very involved with the band. He sounds like he was very supportive of Wally's musical efforts. And regarding the song Did You Know Wrong, that his father actually wrote the original lyrics. It was called Scarface. Apparently it wasn't, the lyrics weren't that great. I don't know, but in Glen's book, he says the lyrics were something like Scarface, Scarface, scarred from ear to ear, Scarface, the girls don't even care. That was the lyrics that his father wrote, and Glen says that they were terrible. So that was the very first song that the band, who I believe were still called the Strand, in 1974. Later on, they changed the name to the Swankers, but the very first song they wrote was the song "Did You Know Wrong." The lyrics were initially Scarface, and then it was actually Paul Cook who changed the lyrics, and I'm not sure what those lyrics were. And then eventually Lydon changed the lyrics to "Did You Know Wrong." In fact, I'll show a picture here. I think this was from a Sotheby's auction. And I guess he was going to call the song Out of My Head. Of course, that's a lyric in the song as well. But these are Lydon's handwritten lyrics to the song. So Wally's father was very involved with the band, and he got them the rehearsal space at Riverside Studios, which was really a big upgrade because they could, leave their equipment there. I don't think the BBC was using the space. I think the building was undergoing renovations. So the band at that time, late 1974, I believe they had changed the name to the Swankers at that point. They were given the keys to the room so they could leave their equipment there and rehearse whenever they wanted. So that was quite a luxury. And I'll show a picture here. I think this is the only picture available of that time. The photo was probably taken by Wally, and you can see Paul Cook there. And I think that's Steve Jones, even though he's playing bass. It doesn't look like Glen to me, but it could be. But I think that's Steve Jones kind of just sitting down, probably playing around with the bass. I wish I could find photos of the whole band there at Riverside Studios, but this is the only one that I could find. And it was on Sex Pistol Photo Archive. So 1974, they were really, especially with the addition of Glen in February, they really were kind of coming together. They were rehearsing not as much at Wally's parents' house, but they were, sort of graduating to better and better rehearsal spaces, at first because of Malcolm, and then because of Wally's dad. All right, so going into 1975, the band is continuing to rehearse at Riverside Studios, and they play their first gig and their only gig with Wally Nightingale, and it was at 205 Kings Road at Tom Salter's Cafe. It was actually up on the upper floor, in England you would call it the first floor. And it was a party for a friend of Paul Cook's. And it was dramatized in the Pistol series, the Hulu series. And I believe in the series, I think the character that plays Steve Jones gets up to the microphone and nothing comes out. He doesn't sing at all. and then he goes running out, and the Chrissie Hynde character follows him and consoles him. But that wasn't really accurate, because he did sing, and he sang 3 songs. He sang Twistin' the Night Away, and Can't Get Enough by Bad Company, and the song Scarface. I thought Scarface was actually turned into the song 17, but Scarface was Did You Know Wrong, the first song that they wrote as a band. They were called the Swankers at this point, and Steve Jones writes in his book that they played an original song, Scarface, and a couple of covers. They played 10 minutes, and then he writes, but that was one hell of a long fucking 10 minutes. Certainly long enough for me to know that being the guy everyone was looking at was not for me. It just ain't my personality. So he learned at that point, at least at that point in his life, he didn't want to be a singer. Malcolm was not at this show. I'll show the picture again of them rehearsing at the Furniture Cave. You can see Steve Jones. That's the way he looked around that time. This is not from the gig though. And but Malcolm wasn't at that show. Vivian was there. Jordan was there. A lot of the Kings Road crowd was there. Tom Salters actually was the original leaseholder of 430 Kings Road. So everybody kind of knew everybody on the Kings Road. But no, Malcolm wasn't at that show because he was in New York managing the New York Dolls, their kind of ill-fated tour of the U.S. and when they broke up down here in Florida. And he came back on May 12th, and he came back with Sylvain's guitar, which he ended up giving to Steve Jones, and also he came back with his Rhodes keyboard, and the keyboard he used, Sylvain's keyboard, as part of the down payment when they rented the space on Denmark Street. So Malcolm wasn't at that show, but it was kind of a pivotal moment for Steve, as he says in his book. He realized at that show that maybe singing wasn't cut out for him, or maybe that wasn't something that he wanted to do at that time. Malcolm did return to London. He returned on May 12th, and he wasn't managing the New York Dolls anymore, and that's when he really kind of threw himself 100% behind Steve Jones' band. They changed the name he finally persuaded them to change the name to the Sex Pistols. Before he had wanted Steve Jones to have the name QT Jones and the Sex Pistols. In fact, he put that on a t-shirt as far back as 1974. But what's kind of a sad irony is that Wally Nightingale is the only one that liked the name Sex Pistols. Apparently the other ones didn't like it, especially Steve Jones. He thought it sounded gay. That's what I read. And but they finally decided to change the name. He had been pushing Steve Jones to change the name to the Sex Pistols for quite a while. And then in June, Malcolm made some much more drastic changes. He went to one of their rehearsals at the Riverside Studios, and in front of the other band members, he said to Wally that, you're out of the band. Apparently, the other band members weren't that keen on it, especially Glen Matlock. He thought it was a bad idea kicking out Wally because Wally was a good musician. And but that's very Malcolm. There was something about Wally where he just didn't like the way he looked, and maybe it was the glasses. I don't know. I don't know what Wally's personality was like. Maybe he didn't think he had the right personality, but it must have been quite sad. And I believe this was in Paul Gorman's book about Malcolm McLaren, that when he sacked Wally, in front of everyone, Nick Kent, the writer Nick Kent, who used to go out with Chrissie Hynde, he was at that rehearsal, and apparently Malcolm said to Nick Kent, "Oh, you can be the guitar player now." And Nick Kent, I guess, was the guitar player for a brief period, but that didn't last. And then also in Paul Gorman's book, he says that Wally actually stayed at that rehearsal and went out for a drink with the band afterwards. So it is a tragic story, Wally Nightingale's life story. I'll get to more of that in a bit, but it sounds like it must have been very painful. Steve and Paul were childhood friends, and but I think at that moment, much like the way Steve and Paul felt when the band broke up at Winterland, and Johnny didn't want to go to Brazil, but Steve and Paul just they went to Brazil because that's what Malcolm wanted. They had great faith in Malcolm, and if he wanted Wally out of the band, Wally was out of the band. And I also read that Wally actually continued to go to some rehearsals after he was kicked out of the band. It sounds so painful. He was kicked out in June, and in July they had a few rehearsals with this person, David Harrison. They had about 6 rehearsals with him at Riverside Studios, and I think Wally played at some of those rehearsals, or he at least turned up at them. And maybe he was hoping that Malcolm would change his mind. Maybe he was hoping that Steve and Paul would stand up to Malcolm and get him back in the band. It's very sad. But David Harrison didn't work out as a singer. Malcolm loved the way he looked. By this time, he wanted Steve Jones to play guitar, obviously, and not be the singer. And but apparently David Harrison didn't. He had the look, but he didn't have quite the personality. And then by the end of July, I guess Wally had had enough, and he told them that they had to get out of Riverside Studios, and they had to, they lost their rehearsal space because Wally wasn't in the band anymore. And then in August, they were still looking for a singer, and Steve Jones was given the guitar, Sylvain's guitar, and they went to, Malcolm happened to be in Glasgow, and he was selling some stolen equipment that Steve Jones had received, or had gotten, I should say, had stolen. And they ran into Midger in Glasgow and asked him to be the singer. And it's funny, I don't need to read the books about this, because I asked Midger himself when he came to play here in our small town of Mount Dora, Florida, and I have a video on that if you want to look that up. And I always thought that they asked Midger to be the singer because he was in a band called Slick, who were kind of a Bay City Rollers kind of band. But when Malcolm and Bernie Rhodes asked him to be the Sex Pistols singer, they didn't even know he was in a band. They just liked the way he looked. So, and Midger turned them down. So Malcolm was very visual, and he was very, he didn't. I think his attitude was, if you have the look and the right look and the right attitude, he didn't care if he'll kick you out of the band even though you're a good guitar player like Wally was, and a good songwriter. But because I think he thought that those things would happen. Anyway, your musical ability would eventually happen, and but he didn't like someone that didn't have the right look. So and then of course in August 22nd, they met John Lydon. They all met him at the Roebuck on Kings Road, and that was that. They had the band that came together, the band that we know and love today. So after Wally was kicked out of the band, you would think that he would have started another band, because apparently, according to especially Glen Matlock, he was the best musician in the band. But he didn't. It sounds like he just stayed at home with his parents there on Hemlock Road. He did go to see them at the 100 Club, the Sex Pistols, at least once. And in an interview, he says that Steve and Paul wouldn't even talk to me. In hindsight, I suppose I'm proud to have been involved in the punk scene, though I don't go around telling everyone of it. after I left, Steve and the others slagged me off in the music press really badly. I never really knew why. I never did them any harm. I wasn't aware that they criticized him in the press. And then of Malcolm, he says, McLaren was devious and clever. He'd see things which other people didn't see, and I suppose that gave him his edge. Malcolm made the Sex Pistols. So he says he's devious and clever, but then he gives him a compliment. He says Malcolm made the Sex Pistols. So that's interesting. Yeah, so Wally didn't start another band right away, which is kind of surprising. It sounds like he stayed in his bedroom there at 50 Hemlock Road. He had a childhood friend named Ron Evans who wrote a book on him called Wally, Did You Know Wrong? I'll put a picture of it here. I'm sure it's an interesting book. I have not read it. And there's a very interesting interview with Ron Evans on YouTube where he talks about Wally. Ron Evans lived at 49 Hemlock Road, which is, I'm assuming, next door, right across the street. And so he knew him very well. He was also a guitar player, his friend Ron Evans, and he had been in the US playing in a band, and he came back to London and in 1981, and he said that he went over to Wally's house, and in his words, Wally was a broken man. His father had died, and he was starting to take heroin which eventually claimed his life, and he wasn't doing much of anything, just staying in his bedroom and I guess doing drugs. So his friend Ron Evans kind of got him out of that and said, hey, let's start a band together. And they started a band called Key West. And his friend was very influenced by sort of the American sounds at the time. And they didn't get a deal. They lasted about 2 years and broke up around 1983. And apparently Wally was, as I said, was starting to do heroin around that time. I don't think he did much during the 80s. In 1989, Wally appeared as a guest guitarist for a Brentwood punk rock band called Beat of the Beast. This was in 1989. And then in 1995, this would have been just before he died in 1996, he played guitar on the song Rich Girls on Matt Sargent's Sex, Drugs, and HIV album. During the same month, he also performed live with the HIV Charity Awareness Project band Rock and Roll Gypsy. So he did a couple things in 1989 and 1995. But what he did have going in the 90s was he sued the Sex Pistols for the copyright for the song "Did You Know Wrong," and I don't know how long it went on. Well, he did get apparently, according to Ron Evans, he did get 50,000 pounds. I guess that was the first payment, and then he probably got was entitled to ongoing royalties after that. But unfortunately, he died the day before he received his payment. His payment came through on May 7th, 1996, and he died on May 6th. So that's sad. I'm not sure if he died from a heroin overdose. I read a couple different accounts that he died from an illness resulting from his heroin use or an overdose. But either way, he died because of his heroin addiction the day before his money came through. So that's sad. I'm assuming that his sister, his surviving family, is getting any ongoing royalties that there are. So I think it was sort of a tragic life of someone that he started a band that he was kicked out of and never really got going musically after that, and then was taken over by his heroin addiction pretty early on. He also was in jail, I believe, for 6 months because of resulting of crime because of his heroin abuse. So yeah, that's the story of Wally Nightingale. Not a happy story, but it's a story. It's a rock and roll story, and I wanted to kind of go more in depth on Wally Nightingale because, like many Sex Pistols fans, I loved God Save the Queen, not just for the A side, but because of the B side, Did You Know Wrong? It's a great riff, and Johnny obviously wrote great lyrics, and it's just a great song. And I believe the Sex Pistols with Frank Carter do Did You Know Wrong in their set. So if you happen to see the Sex Pistols, I know they're going on tour again this month in June 5th, I think. They go out on the road again. If you happen to see them and they do Did You Know Wrong in their set, you can think of Wally Nightingale, the man who really started the band and kept it going, the band that became the Sex Pistols, and the one who wrote their first song, Did You Know Wrong, Wally Nightingale. So hope you enjoyed this Sex Pistols video, and until the next time, I'll be seeing you.